Hello, and welcome to Brownie Ponders, in which I, an actual brownie, ponder over matters of philosophy, politics, psychology, sociology, and so on. Aesthetics are all the rage these days, what with the youth trying more than ever to find some sort of label to latch onto. There's dark academia, cottagecore, alternative, soft girl or boy, vaporwave, the list goes on and on. But one particular aesthetic fascinates me on a deeper level than most, and this is Weirdcore. Weirdcore mixes elements of nostalgia, eeriness, and bizarreness, all together creating a truly complex appeal. Let's break this down further, but before we get started, I will reiterate that all points expressed over the course of this video are a product of my personal opinions, perspectives, and perceptions. Don't treat it as fact because it isn't. Many people use Weirdcore, Traumacore, and Dreamcore interchangeably. I get that, considering all three aesthetics have similar elements on a surface level, but each of these aesthetics has quite a few nuances that render them separate and distinct. Weirdcore has its roots in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Preceding Weirdcore is Traumacore, which focuses more heavily upon trauma. Specifically, Traumacore focuses upon applying an eerie childish innocence to the disturbing realities of various types of abuse and mental illness. Traumacore is characterized by deliberately low-quality imagery, references to iconic Japanese kawaii characters such as Hello Kitty, My Melody, and Kuromi, and lines of text alluding to darker underpinnings of abuse and mental illness. Colors typically lean feminine with a dreary tint, popular tones being pale pinks and gray-washed purples, hinting at a tarnished innocence. Elements from a more primitive web interface heavily influenced this aesthetic, what with internet use still being relatively new in the 90s. Weirdcore is an evolved Traumacore, broader in scope with less of a focus upon negative childhood experiences. It prompts more feelings of eeriness and nostalgia rather than the blunt implications of abuse characterized by Traumacore. Often regarded as a sister to Weirdcore, Dreamcore is a subgenre, so to speak, of the broader Weirdcore. As the name suggests, Dreamcore focuses upon the more surreal aspects of nostalgia, as opposed to the pragmatic utilitarian and pseudo-realistic appeal of Weirdcore. Dreamcore is somewhat of a fever dream aesthetic. A particular theme in Dreamcore is the distant urgency to return to consciousness, as if the viewer is trapped in some sort of harmful haze or delusion. Disney's Alice in Wonderland has some great elements of Dreamcore. Dreamcore, Traumacore, and Weirdcore all come from the same aesthetic family, if you will, but each has its own unique characteristics. Aimed at the pragmatic eeriness of the early 2000s in particular, Weirdcore is meant to elicit feelings of nostalgia towards one's childhood. As such, many Weirdcore images portray settings that Gen Z and millennials might have frequented in their early school years, such as family restaurants, ball pits, moon bounces, birthday parties, public pools, and classrooms. Primitive graphic planes are also commonly used, as the open stretches of land and off-putting syntheticism of the oversaturated pigmentation, as well as the nostalgia associated with early Windows installments, constitute the perfect setting for a weirdscape. And of course, what sort of Weirdcore explanation would this be if I didn't mention liminal spaces? Liminal spaces, or the transitory area between two separate locations, are somewhat of a cornerstone of Weirdcore and all its subgenres. Corridors, lobbies, hallways, and staircases. These liminal spaces often prompt feelings of comfort and familiarity, seeing as we've spent copious quantities of time waiting in these areas. But deserted, as they often are in the context of Weirdcore, liminal spaces can often be a source of anxiety, especially as they stretch far ahead into a dizzying vortex, often dimly or entirely unlit to further elicit unease. The Backrooms, an urban legend born from a thread on unsettling images posted on 4chan in May 2019 describing an endless and unescapable stretch of mazes constituted of office rooms, hallways, lobbies, and other often liminal environments, is the literal definition of Weirdcore settings. The aforementioned settings are all a great start, but there are technical elements that must go into these images before they are rendered optimum Weirdcore material. Editing makes up a good portion of the aesthetic. Deliberately poor, amateurish editing skills are a staple of Weirdcore. Oversaturation, grainy image quality, primitive graphics, and cut and pasted eyeballs and emojis are among elements commonly utilized. Similar to Traumacore, out-of-context and arbitrarily placed lines of text are also common in Weirdcore, but they're typically more minimalist and are not integral to the image as they are to Traumacore. Weirdcore isn't limited to imagery. The aesthetic can be expressed through fashion as well. Weirdcore fashion is colorful and childish, lending itself to nostalgia. Converse high tops, graphic tees, jumpers, sundresses, multicolored stripes, crossbody bags, oversized hoodies, and kid jewelry mixed with bizarre and sometimes disturbing masks make up the brunt of Weirdcore fashion. Now to get to what I really wanted to dig into, the psychology behind Weirdcore. I think what makes Weirdcore prompt such strong and conflicting feelings of anxiety yet comfort, eeriness yet nostalgia, alienation yet familiarity, is the fact that it's close enough to reality but falls just short. A ceiling that opens into the sky, a school corridor lined with eyeballs. These images take what feels familiar and tweak it just a touch to throw off our equilibrium, prompting unease. It's similar to how if a person you knew very well, say a sibling or a close friend, acted off. There's something particularly terrifying about a comforting and predictable entity or concept diverging from its usual patterns. This is why eerie images often have no overtly horrific elements. Take Eric Knudson's Slender Man, for example. If you think about the urban legend's appearance in a very objective sense, there's nothing obviously terrifying about him. He has no visible teeth, no visible claws. On the contrary, he's wearing a smart-looking suit. But there's something missing from him, the ability to glean his emotions from facial features, of which he has none, the ability to gauge his approachability through human body language, which he lacks, and the ability to categorize by any means based upon visual characteristics, of which he has precious few. Humans fear the unknown, which is why horror movies often design monsters to be ominous of intent and in appearance. They look and act human enough and yet not human enough. Just enough to scare the pudding out of us, and Weirdcore takes advantage of some of these sentiments. That's why you'll often find that Weirdcore imagery and fashion cover up coherent faces with masks, cut and pasted articles, or black voids, to rob us of the ability to identify and recognize, categorize, and assess. In a way, Weirdcore is its own liminal space, somewhere between the comfort of our origins and the discomfort of bizarre alterations. Weirdcore is one of my favorite aesthetics because it's a bit more complicated than many other aesthetics. It prompts dichotomous feelings of anxiety and unease by borrowing nostalgic imagery from the late 90s and early 2000s, and by overlaying this with eerie elements. Really, aren't many rigid boundaries to Weirdcore. Pretty much anything can qualify as Weirdcore as long as it's edited poorly, an eyeball has been slapped on it, and all coherent faces have been replaced with something gross. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to a piece of cake, give art critiquing a shot, another video, another microphone. I have a good feeling about this one. I hope you'll lend me more of your time in the future. If you're craving brownies, don't give in to your baser urges, eat a blondie instead. Have a great day.